The wind howled through the Blue Ridge Mountains, carrying whispers of secrets that clung to the walls of our old rest house. I was 16, angry, and trapped in a life I didn't choose, watching my father unravel a decision that would shatter our fragile world. By midnight, everything I thought I knew about love, family, and truth would lie in pieces. My name is Ellie Harper, and I grew up in Asheville, North Carolina, where the mountains loom like silent judges over every choice you make. Our rest house, a creaky relic from my grandfather's days, sat on the edge of town, its sagging porch and peeling paint a testament to years of neglect. Dad, a quiet man in his early 50s with hands rough from carpentry, had kept it running as a side gig, renting it to tourists chasing mountain air. I hated the musty smell, the endless chores, the way it tethered us to a past we couldn't escape. But that summer, when Dad told me he'd invited a gay couple to stay, I felt something shift, like the ground beneath me was about to crack. Why them? I asked, my voice sharp as I scrubbed dishes in our cramped kitchen. Dad's eyes, tired and gray, met mine. They needed a place. Ellie, they're good people. His tone was firm, but I caught the flicker of doubt in his jaw. I didn't push back, not then. I was too busy wrestling my own confusion, the kind that comes from being 16 in a town where different was a dirty word. The couple, Jamie and Caleb, arrived at dusk in a beat-up Subaru, their laughter spilling out before they even stepped onto the porch. Jamie, mid-20s, had curly brown hair and a denim jacket that looked like it had seen 100 road trips. Caleb, same age, was quieter, with neatly trimmed black hair and a sweater that hugged his frame. They held hands, unapologetic, their eyes bright with something I couldn't name, love, maybe, or defiance. I watched from the porch, my notebook clutched tight, feeling like an outsider in my own home. Dad greeted them warmly, but I saw the neighbors' curtains twitch across the street. Asheville was progressive in pockets, but our corner of it clung to old ways. I wondered what they saw when they looked at Jamie and Caleb, two men who loved each other, or a challenge to everything they believed. I wasn't sure what I saw, either. That night, as the four of us sat around the rest house's oak table, the air felt thick with unspoken words. Jamie told stories of their travels camping in Yellowstone, hitchhiking through Oregon, his voice light but his eyes scanning the room, like he was waiting for judgment. Caleb was quieter, his hand resting on Jamie's, steadying him. Dad listened, nodding, but I caught the way his fingers tightened around his coffee mug. I stayed silent, scribbling in my notebook, trying to make sense of the tension coiling in my chest. Around 9, a knock rattled the door. It was Mrs. Grayson, our neighbor, her face pinched with righteous fury. "Mark," she said to Dad, ignoring the rest of us. "You know this ain't right. People are talking." Her voice was low, but it carried the weight of the whole town. Dad stood, his frame filling the doorway. "They're guests, Helen. Same as anyone." His words were calm, but I saw his hands tremble. Mrs. Grayson left, but her words lingered like smoke. Jamie and Caleb exchanged a look, and I realized they were used to being the spark that ignited other people's fears. I wanted to say something, to break the silence, but my tongue felt heavy. Instead, I wrote in my notebook, "Why does love make people so angry?" As the night deepened, The rest house creaked under the weight of its own history. Dad poured more coffee, trying to keep things light, but I could tell he was shaken. Jamie and Caleb offered to leave, their voices soft but firm. "We don't want to cause trouble," Caleb said, his eyes meeting Dad's. I saw something pass between them, understanding. Maybe, or shared pain. Dad shook his head. "You're staying. This is my house." But trouble was already brewing. Outside, headlights flashed in the driveway, and voice slow, angry carried through the thin walls. I peeked through the curtains and saw 3 figures. Shadows in the dark. Their words slurred with beer and hate. My stomach twisted. This wasn't just about Jamie and Caleb anymore. It was about Dad. About me. About what we were willing to stand for. I turned to Dad, my voice barely a whisper. "What do we do?" His face was hard, but his eyes were soft, like he was seeing me for the first time. "We protect our own," he said. And in that moment, I realized our own included Jamie and Caleb. The night was far from over, and the choices we made would echo for years. The voices outside grew louder, a jagged edge to their laughter that made my skin crawl. I pressed my face against the window, the glass cold against my cheek, and saw 3 men locals. Probably, their faces half lit by the porch light. One held a beer can, swinging it like a weapon. My heart pounded as I turned to Dad, who was already moving toward the door, his shoulders squared like he was bracing for a fight. "Stay here," he told us, his voice low but steady. Jamie and Caleb stood, their chairs scraping against the floor. "Mark, we can handle this," Jamie said, his tone sharp with resolve. But Dad shook his head. "This is my fight, too." I wanted to scream at him to stop, to not go out there, but the words stuck in my throat. I followed him to the door, clutching my notebook like it could shield me. Caleb's hand brushed mine as he stepped forward, his touch gentle but firm. "Ellie, stay back," he said, his voice calm despite the chaos. I nodded, but my feet didn't move. I needed to see this, to understand what was happening to us. Outside, the men's voices sharpened. "You think you can just bring them here?" One shouted, his words slurring into a snarl. "This is our town." Dad stood on the porch, his silhouette stark against the moonlight. "This is my home," he said, his voice carrying a weight I'd never heard before. "You don't get to decide who's welcome." The leader, a burly man I recognized as Tom Wheeler from the hardware store, stepped closer, his face twisted with anger. "You're making a mistake, Mark. You and your daughter don't need this kind of trouble." My name in his mouth felt like a violation, and I gripped my notebook tighter, my nails digging into the cover. Jamie and Caleb stepped onto the porch behind Dad, their presence a quiet defiance. Tom's eyes flicked to them, and I saw the hate there, raw and unfiltered. "You don't belong here," he spat. Caleb's hand found Jamie's again, and they stood taller, their silence louder than any words. I don't know who moved first, but suddenly Tom lunged, his fist swinging toward Dad. My scream caught in my throat as Dad dodged, grabbing Tom's arm and twisting it back. The other 2 men hesitated, then surged forward, and the porch became a blur of motion grunts, curses, the crack of wood as someone stumbled against the railing. "Stop it," I yelled, my voice breaking free. I ran outside, my notebook falling to the ground. Caleb pulled me back, his arms strong around me, but I twisted free. My eyes locked on Dad. He was holding his own, but blood trickled from his lip. And Tom was bigger, meaner. Jamie jumped in, shoving one of the men back, his movements quick and precise, like he'd done this before. The fight ended as quickly as it started. Tom and his friends backed off, muttering threats as they retreated to their truck. "This ain't over, Mark," Tom called as they peeled out, tires screeching. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the creak of the porch and Dad's ragged breathing. Inside, we patched Dad up, his lips swollen but his eyes fierce. "I'm sorry you had to see that," he said to me, his voice rough. I shook my head, tears burning my eyes. "I'm not." I didn't know why I said it, but it felt true. Something in me had shifted, like a door creaking open. Jamie and Caleb sat close, their hands still linked, but their faces were drawn, tired. "We should go," Jamie said quietly. "We're bringing this on you." Dad leaned forward, his elbows on the table. "You're not going anywhere. Not tonight." His voice was final, and I saw the same stubbornness in him that I'd inherited. Later, as I lay in my room, the rest house groaning around me, couldn't sleep. I kept seeing Tom's face, the hate in his eyes, and the way Jamie and Caleb stood together, unyielding. I opened my notebook and wrote, "What makes someone brave enough to love when the world tells them not to?" The next morning, the air felt different, like the storm had passed but left something new in its wake. Jamie and Caleb were up early, making coffee, their laughter soft but real. Dad joined them, and for the first time, I saw him smile, not the forced kind he used with tourists, but a real one. I sat at the table, my notebook open, and listened as they talked about their lives, their dreams. Jamie wanted to open a bookstore. Caleb taught high school history. They were ordinary, yet extraordinary, and I felt a pang of envy for their courage. But the town wasn't done with us. By noon, whispers had spread, and a small crowd gathered outside the rest house. Neighbors, churchgoers, people I'd known my whole life. They weren't shouting, not yet, but their presence was a warning. Dad stood on the porch, his face unreadable, and I realized this was bigger than one night, bigger than us. The crowd outside wasn't large, maybe a dozen people, but their silence was louder than any shouting. They stood in a loose semicircle, their faces a mix of curiosity and disapproval, like they were waiting for Dad to explain himself. Mrs. Grayson was there, her arms crossed, her lips a thin line. I stood behind Dad on the porch, my heart racing, while Jamie and Caleb stayed inside, their silhouettes visible through the window. Dad raised his hands, his voice steady. "If you've got something to say, say it." His words hung in the air, challenging. A man stepped forward, Mr. Callahan, who ran the local diner. "Mark, we're not here to fight," he said, his tone measured. "But you're stirring things up. This town's got values." "Values?" Dad's voice sharpened. "Like turning away people who need a place to stay. Like judging folks you don't even know." I'd never heard him speak like that. So fierce, so unafraid. I glanced at Jamie and Caleb. who were watching through the window, their faces tense but resolute. "Mrs. Grayson spoke up, her voice shrill. "It's not about them staying, Mark. It's about what they represent. We've got kids to think about." Her eyes flicked to me, and I felt my face burn. I wanted to shout back, to tell her I wasn't a kid, that I could think for myself. But my voice stayed locked in my throat. Dad took a step forward, his hands dropping to his sides. "My daughter's learning what it means to stand up for what's right. That's the value I'm teaching her." His words hit me like a wave, and I realized he wasn't just defending Jamie and Caleb, was defending me, too. My right to see the world differently. The crowd murmured, some nodding, others shaking their heads. Mr. Callahan stepped back, his expression softening. "We just want things to stay peaceful, Mark." Dad nodded, but his jaw was tight. Peace doesn't mean silence. It means doing what's right, even when it's hard. The crowd dispersed slowly, their footsteps heavy on the gravel. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Inside, Jamie and Caleb were waiting, their eyes searching Dad's face. "You didn't have to do that," Caleb said quietly. Dad shrugged, a small smile breaking through. "Yeah, I did." That afternoon, we worked together to clean the rest house, sweeping the porch, fixing a loose shutter, trying to reclaim the space from the tension of the night before. Jamie and Caleb moved with a quiet efficiency, their hands brushing as they passed tools to each other. I watched them, my notebook open on my lap, and wrote, "Love isn't just a feeling, it's a choice," over and over. But peace didn't last. By evening, a new threat arrived, not fists or shouts, but a letter slipped under the door. I found it first, the paper crisp and official looking, with the town council's seal. My hands shook as I handed it to Dad. He read it in silence, his face growing pale. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "They're threatening to shut down the rest house," he said, his voice flat. "Zoning violations, they claim. But we both know what this is about." He crumpled the letter, but his eyes were burning. Jamie and Caleb exchanged a look, guilt written across their faces. "This is because of us," Jamie said, his voice breaking. "No," Dad said firmly. "This is because of them. Because they're scared of what they don't understand." He looked at me, and I saw something new in his eyes, pride. Maybe, or hope. "We're not backing down, Ellie. Not now." That night, we sat around the table again, the letter lying between us like a bomb waiting to go off. Jamie and Caleb told us more about their lives, how they'd met at a college protest, how they'd fought for their right to be together in a world that didn't always welcome them. I listened, my pen moving across the pages of my notebook, capturing their words, their strength. But outside, the town was stirring again. I heard the rumble of a truck, the low murmur of voices. This time, it wasn't just a few angry men, it was something bigger, something organized. Dad stood, his face set. "Ellie, stay with them," he said, nodding toward Jamie and Caleb. But I shook my head. "I'm coming with you." He didn't argue. Together, we stepped onto the porch, the night air cold against my skin. The headlights were back, brighter this time, and I saw the outlines of more people than before. My heart pounded. But I stood beside Dad, my chin high. This was our home, our fight. The headlights cut through the darkness like knives, illuminating a crowd that had grown to nearly 20. They weren't shouting. Not yet. But their faces were hard, their eyes glinting with purpose. I recognized more of them now, Mr. Callahan, Mrs. Grayson, even Pastor Evans from the church down the road. My stomach twisted as I realized this wasn't just about anger anymore. It was about power. Dad stood tall, his hands steady despite the blood still crusted on his lip from the night before. "What do you want?" he called, his voice carrying over the murmur of the crowd. Pastor Evans stepped forward, his Bible clutched like a shield. "Mark, we're here to talk sense. This isn't about hate, it's about protecting our community." "Protecting it from what?" Dad shot back. "From two people trying to live their lives." I felt a surge of pride in him, but fear, too. The crowd was bigger than us, stronger than us. I glanced back at the rest house, where Jamie and Caleb stood in the doorway, their faces unreadable. Mrs. Grayson spoke up, her voice sharp. "You're bringing trouble to our doorstep, Mark. That letter from the council is just the start." Her words sent a chill through me. The letter wasn't a bluff, it was a weapon, and they were ready to use it. I stepped forward, my voice shaking but loud. "Why do you care so much? They're not hurting anyone." The crowd turned to me, and I felt their eyes like weights. Pastor Evans softened his tone, but it felt patronizing. "Ellie, you're young. You don't understand what's at stake." "I understand enough," I said, my hands clenched. "I understand you're scared of something you don't even know." My words surprised me, sharp and clear, like they'd been waiting to break free. Dad put a hand on my shoulder, his touch grounding me. The crowd shifted, some looking away, others muttering. Mr. Callahan spoke, his voice quieter now. "Mark, we don't want to shut you down. Just make different choices." Dad's jaw tightened. "I choose to do what's right. You should try it sometime." The standoff lasted only a moment longer before the crowd began to disperse, their resolve wavering under Dad's defiance. But I knew this wasn't the end. The letter, the council, the town, they'd keep coming. Inside, Jamie and Caleb were packing, their movements quick and quiet. "You don't have to go," I said, my voice breaking. Jamie looked at me, his eyes soft but tired. "Ellie, we've been through this before. We know when we're not wanted." "But you are wanted," I said, the words spilling out. "By us." Caleb paused, his hand on Jamie's shoulder, and for a moment, I thought they'd stay. But then Caleb shook his head. "We can't keep putting you in danger." Dad walked in, the crumpled letter in his hand. "You're not leaving," he said, his voice firm. "Not because of them." He looked at me, then back at Jamie and Caleb. "We're fighting this. Together." The next day, Dad called a lawyer friend, someone he'd known since high school. They spent hours on the phone, going over the council's letter, looking for loopholes. I listened from the kitchen, my notebook open, writing down fragments of their conversation. Zoning laws, precedent, discrimination. Words I didn't fully understand but knew were important. Jamie and Caleb stayed, though I could tell it cost them. They helped around the rest house, fixing a leaky faucet, painting the porch. Their laughter filled the space, but it was tinged with caution, like they were waiting for the next blow. I watched them, trying to understand how they could love so fiercely in a world that pushed back so hard. That evening, I found Caleb alone on the porch, staring at the mountains. "Do you ever get tired?" I asked, my voice small. He looked at me, his eyes kind but heavy. "Every day," he said. But then I look at Jamie, and I remember why I keep going. His words stayed with me, sinking deep. I wrote in my notebook, "Love is worth fighting for, even when it hurts." I didn't know it then, but those words would become my anchor in the days to come. By nightfall, another letter arrived. This one more direct, a formal notice of a council meeting to discuss the rest house's status. Dad read it aloud, his voice steady but his hands shaking. "They're not giving up," he said. Jamie and Caleb exchanged a look, and I knew they were thinking of leaving again. But I wasn't ready to let them go. Not yet. The council meeting was set for Friday, 3 days away, and the rest house felt like a fortress under siege. Dad spent hours preparing, poring over legal documents with his lawyer friend, his face etched with determination. I watched him, wondering where this strength came from, a man who'd always seemed so quiet, so steady, now fighting a battle I didn't fully understand. Jamie and Caleb tried to keep things light, teaching me how to make their favorite campfire desserts mores with a twist of cinnamon. We sat on the porch, the fire crackling, their laughter mingling with the night air. But I saw the strain in their eyes, the way they glanced at the road, expecting trouble. "You don't have to stay," I said, my voice barely audible over the fire. Jamie smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We're not running, Ellie. Not this time." The next day, I went to school, but the whispers followed me. Kids I'd known since kindergarten stared, their voices low but sharp. "Your dad's causing trouble," one said. "Why's he letting those guys stay?" I wanted to scream, to tell them they didn't understand, but I just clutched my notebook and walked away. At lunch, my best friend, Sarah, sat with me, her eyes wide with questions. "Is it true?" she asked. "About the couple?" I nodded, my throat tight. "They're good people, Sarah. Better than most." She didn't say much after that, but her silence felt like a betrayal. I wrote in my notebook, "Why does doing the right thing feel so lonely?" That night, Dad called a meeting at the rest house. A few allies showed up: Mrs. Larson, who ran the bookstore, and Mr. Patel, who owned the gas station. They'd heard about the council's threats and wanted to help. Mrs. Larson brought a stack of books on civil rights, her voice fierce as she talked about precedent and justice. Mr. Patel was quieter, but his presence was steady, grounding. "This town's better than this," he said, and I wanted to believe him. Jamie and Caleb shared their story with the group, their voices steady but raw. They talked about the places they'd been turned away from, the threats they'd faced, the love that kept them going. I listened, my pen flying across the pages, capturing every word. When they finished, Mrs. Larson reached for their hands. her eyes wet. "You're not alone," she said. But the town wasn't done. The next morning, graffiti covered the rest house's front wall. Ugly words. Hateful words. Scrawled in red paint. I stared at them, my chest tight, until Dad handed me a paint roller. "We cover it up," he said. "We don't let them win." Jamie and Caleb joined us, their hands steady as we painted over the hate, layer by layer. By Thursday, the tension was unbearable. The council meeting loomed, and rumors swirled about a protest outside the town hall. Dad was calm, but I could see the weight on him, the way his shoulders sagged when he thought no one was watching. I found him on the porch that night, staring at the stars. "Are you scared?" I asked. He looked at me, his eyes soft. "Terrified, but not for me, for you. I want you to grow up in a world that's better than this." His words hit me hard, and I realized this wasn't just about the rest house or Jamie and Caleb. It was about the kind of person I wanted to be. The morning of the council meeting, we woke to find the rest house's windows smashed. Glass glittered on the porch, and Jamie's face went pale as he saw it. "This is our fault," he whispered. Dad shook his head. "No, this is their shame, not yours." We cleaned up the glass, our hands moving in silence. Caleb found a piece of cardboard and wrote on it in bold letters, "Love wins." He taped it over the broken window, and I felt a spark of hope, fragile but real. As we prepared for the meeting, I looked at Jamie and Caleb, their hands linked, their eyes fierce with determination. I looked at Dad, his face lined with worry but unyielding. And I looked at myself, my notebook filled with questions and truths I was just beginning to understand. The fight was coming, and we were ready. The town hall was packed, the air thick with tension and the hum of whispered conversations. I sat between Dad and Jamie, my notebook clutched tight, my hands sweating. Caleb sat on Jamie's other side, his posture calm but his eyes scanning the room. The council sat at a long table up front, their faces stern, the American and North Carolina flags framing them like a judgment. Outside, the protest had grown, maybe 30 people, holding signs with words like "family values" and "protect our town." Their chants filtered through the walls. A low, angry hum. I glanced at Dad, his jaw tight, and I knew he heard it, too. Mrs. Larson and Mr. Patel were there, sitting a few rows back, their presence a small anchor in the storm. The council president, a gray-haired man named Mr. Thompson, called the meeting to order. "We're here to discuss the zoning status of the Harper Rest House," he said, his voice clipped. "There've been complaints about its operation." I felt my stomach twist. This wasn't about zoning, it was about us. About Jamie and Caleb. About what we stood for. Dad stood, his voice steady as he addressed the room. "This rest house has been in my family for generations. We followed every rule, paid every fee. The complaints aren't about zoning theory, about who I choose to welcome." His words were met with murmurs, some supportive, others hostile. Mrs. Grayson stood next, her voice sharp. "This is about decency. Mark, you're exposing your daughter to things she shouldn't see." I felt my face burn, anger rising. Before I could stop myself, I stood, my voice shaking but clear. "I'm right here, Mrs. Grayson. And what I see is two people who love each other, who've done nothing wrong. What's indecent about that? The room went quiet, and I felt every eye on me. Dad's hand found mine, squeezing gently, and I saw pride in his eyes. Jamie and Caleb looked at me, their faces soft with gratitude. Mr. Thompson cleared his throat, clearly rattled. This isn't about personal beliefs, he said. It's about the law. But then Mrs. Larson stood, her voice ringing out. If this is about the law, then let's talk about discrimination. Shutting down the rest house because of who stays there. That's illegal. And we all know it. Mr. Patel nodded, adding, this town is better than fear. We've welcomed tourists from all over, why not these two? The council hesitated, their faces uneasy. The crowd outside grew louder, their chants turning to shouts. I glanced at Jamie and Caleb, who sat close, their hands linked, their eyes steady. I realized they'd faced rooms like this before, crowds like that, and still they chose to love, to fight. Mr. Thompson called for a recess, and the room erupted into chaos, voices arguing, chairs scraping. Dad pulled me close, his voice low. You were incredible, Ellie. I nodded, but my heart was racing. This wasn't over. Outside, the protest had spilled onto the steps, and as we left the hall, we were met with a wall of anger. Signs waved, voices shouted, and I felt the weight of their hate. But then I saw Sarah, my friend from school, standing at the edge of the crowd, her face torn. She stepped forward, her voice small but clear. Ellie, I'm sorry. I was wrong. Her words were a lifeline, and I grabbed her hand, pulling her toward us. Stand with us, I said, and she did. Her presence a small victory. Mrs. Larson and Mr. Patel joined us, too, forming a small circle around Jamie and Caleb. The crowd's shouts grew louder, but we stood firm, our hands linked, our hearts pounding. Back at the rest house, we collapsed around the table, exhausted but unbroken. Dad looked at Uzmi, Jamie, Caleb, Sarah, Mrs. Larson, Mr. Patel, and smiled. This is what family looks like, he said. I wrote his words in my notebook, my hand shaking. Family isn't just blood, it's the people who fight for you. The council's decision was still pending, but we knew the fight wasn't over. The town was divided, and the rest house was still at risk. But something had changed in us. In me. I looked at Jamie and Caleb, their love a quiet rebellion, and I knew I'd never see the world the same way again. The days after the council meeting were a blur of tension and hope. The town was split. Some rallied behind us, leaving notes of support taped to the rest house door, while others doubled down, their whispers turning to open glares. Dad kept working with his lawyer, building a case to save the rest house. His face lined with exhaustion but his resolve unbroken. Jamie and Caleb stayed, their presence a quiet defiance. They helped with repairs, their hands steady as they fixed the broken windows, painted over the graffiti that appeared almost nightly. I watched them, marveling at their strength, their ability to laugh despite the weight of the world. One afternoon, Jamie caught me staring and grinned. What's in that notebook of yours, Ellie? I hesitated, then opened it, showing him the pages filled with questions, observations, fragments of their story. I'm trying to understand, I said. How you keep going. He read a line, love is worth fighting for, and his eyes softened. You're getting it, he said. It's not just about us. It's about everyone who comes after. His words stuck with me, and I started writing more, not just for myself, but for others. I posted some of my thoughts online, anonymous but honest, about love, fear, and standing up. To my surprise, people responded, strangers, kids from school, even folks from neighboring towns. Some agreed, some didn't, but it felt like a spark, like maybe we were starting something bigger. Sarah became a regular at the rest house, her apology at the council meeting turning into action. She helped organize a small rally, just a handful of us holding signs that read love is love and welcome all. It wasn't much, but it drew attention, good and bad. The local paper ran a story, and suddenly our fight was public. A headline that spread beyond Asheville. But with visibility came danger. One night, a brick crashed through the kitchen window, glass shattering across the floor. Taped to it was a note, leave or else. Dad's face was thunder as he swept up the glass. But Jamie and Caleb were calm, almost resigned. We've seen worse, Caleb said, his voice steady. But we're not leaving. Dad nodded, his eyes fierce. Neither am I. He looked at me, and I felt the weight of his choice, not just to fight for the rest house, but to fight for what it stood for. I added a new line to my notebook. Courage isn't fearless, it's choosing to act despite the fear. The council's decision came a week later, delivered in another crisp envelope. They'd ruled in our favor, citing lack of evidence for zoning violations. But it felt like a hollow victory. The town was still divided, and the threats didn't stop. Dad started sleeping with a baseball bat by his bed, and I caught Jamie and Caleb whispering about leaving, their voices heavy with guilt. Couldn't let them go. Not after everything. I found them on the porch one evening, their hands linked, their faces tired. You changed us, I said, my voice breaking. You changed me. If you leave, they win. Caleb looked at me, his eyes soft but resolute. Ellie, this isn't just about us anymore. It's about you, your dad, this town. He was right. The rest house wasn't just a building, it was a symbol, a stand against fear. We started planning, not just to save it, but to make it something more. Mrs. Larson suggested turning it into a community space, a place for everyone, no matter who they were. Mr. Patel offered to fund repairs, and Sarah started a crowdfunding page. The response was slow but steady: donations, messages, people wanting to help. One night, as we sat around the table, planning the future, I realized something had shifted. The rest house, once a burden, was now a beacon. Jamie and Caleb were at the heart of it. Their love a quiet revolution that had changed us all. I wrote in my notebook, sometimes, love doesn't just change hearts, it changes the world. But the final test was coming, and it would ask more of us than we'd ever given. The final night at the rest house started with a quiet that felt too fragile to trust. We'd spent weeks building something Newa vision for the rest house as a place of welcome, a sanctuary for anyone who needed it. The crowdfunding had raised enough to start repairs. And Mrs. Larson had rallied local artists to paint a mural on the side of the building. A vibrant swirl of colors that read "All are welcome." But the town's anger hadn't faded. And we knew the fight wasn't over. That evening, we held an open house, inviting anyone who wanted to see what we were building. It was a risk, but Dad insisted. "If we hide, we lose," he said. Jamie and Caleb agreed, their hands linked as they set up tables with coffee and pastries. Sarah and I hung fairy lights on the porch, the soft glow pushing back the darkness. Mrs. Larson and Mr. Patel were there, their faces bright with hope. People came more than we expected. Some were supporters, their smiles warm as they toured the rest house, admiring the mural, sharing stories. Others were skeptical, their eyes narrow, but they came anyway, drawn by curiosity or defiance. I stood by the door, my notebook in hand, watching the crowd, my heart caught between hope and fear. Then they arrived, the ones we'd been dreading. Tom Wheeler and his crew, their faces hard, their voices loud as they pushed through the crowd. "This is a mistake, Mark," Tom said, his eyes locked on Dad. "You're tearing this town apart." Dad stepped forward, his voice calm but unyielding. "No, Tom. We're building it up. You can join us or not. But this is happening." The crowd went quiet, the air electric. I saw Jamie and Caleb tense, their hands tightening around each other. Sarah stood beside me, her breath shallow. Tom's face twisted, and for a moment, I thought he'd swing again. But then Mr. Patel stepped forward, his voice steady. "Tom, you've known me for years. You know this town can be better than this." Mrs. Larson joined him, her eyes fierce. "We're not going anywhere. Neither are they." Something shifted in Tom's face, anger. Yes, but also doubt. He looked at the crowd, at the mural, at Jamie and Caleb standing together, unafraid. He didn't say another word, just turned and left, his crew following. The crowd exhaled, and I felt a weight lift, fragile but real. The night ended with music, laughter, and stories shared under the fairy lights. Jamie and Caleb danced on the porch, their movements slow and sure, their love a quiet rebellion that lit up the dark. Dad watched them, his eyes soft, and I knew he'd changed. To not just for them, but for me, for the daughter he wanted to raise in a better world. I wrote one final line in my notebook. Love doesn't just win, it builds. It heals. It changes everything. Years later, the rest house still stands, a beacon in the mountains. Jamie and Caleb moved on, but they visit often. Their bookstore a reality now, just down the road. Dad's hair is grayer, but his smile is brighter, and he tells anyone who'll listen about the night that changed us all. I'm older now, my notebook filled with stories, some published, some just for me. But that summer, that fight, that love, it's the story I carry closest. The one that taught me what it means to stand up, to love fiercely, to build something better. The town isn't perfect, but it's changing, one heart at a time. And every time I see that mural, those words, all are welcome, I remember the night we chose love over fear, and how it changed us all.